25 terawatts is what it takes to power the world today. That number also doubles every 25 to 30 years. The energy transition is not really about today's 25, it's about tomorrow's 50 by 2050 or 100 by 2075. So we're looking for a 100 terawatt level solution. How do we enable a world that is not 100 million barrels of oil per day, but potentially 1 billion barrels of oil per day within 3, 4, 5 generations? So we really need to focus on fission, fusion, and deep geo and win at that. China is leading, but they're leading in the wrong things. So let them win that race, because that race leads nowhere.
When are we going to see the first commercial plant from Quaise?
So sooner than you think.
What do we think?
By the end of the year.
Okay.
We're 9 months away from the world's first Superhot EGS system, one that punches at the weight class of oil and gas and nuclear. That is a singular event in energy.
Welcome to Deep Tech Live by SOSV, the podcast where we explore the frontiers of deep tech and its impact on our world, with the help of top technologists, researchers, and pioneering founders shaping tomorrow. SOSV Deep Tech Live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Deep Tech Live session. My name is Duncan. I'm general partner here at SOSV. I also look after SOSV Hacks, our physical sciences division, where we focus on investing in a range of different technologies through energy, manufacturing, automation, and more recently into the semiconductor fabrication space. Tonight, we're going to go incredibly deep, about 20 kilometers below the surface of the Earth, with the CEO and founder of Quaise Energy, Carlos. I actually met Carlos just after I'd done an interview with Tim Latimer, who's the CEO of Fervo Energy. And at the time, I was incredibly impressed with geothermal. It was an area that I hadn't looked at as an investor. Honestly, I felt like I'd missed out a little bit. I then happened to sit next to you in Boston. I was enthralled for over an hour. I hope to get some of this across to the audience today. He's a very captivating person. As he explained to me some of the differences in what he's doing at Quaise, I then kind of subtly was trying to inquire as to who had already invested in the company and found he's already got who's who on his cap table anyway, so it was far too late for a small investor like me. But what I want to do is just kind of give you all here, the deep tech community in New York, and also those viewing online, some of the insights and the stories that Carlos kind of took me through on that hour that we had together. Anyway, welcome, Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to talk about geothermal and talk about the most powerful kind of geothermal, the one that's most transformative in the world. How long do we have, just to make sure we measure our answer?
45 minutes-ish.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. I mean, we can go longer if you want.
45 is good.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I guess first off, let's talk a bit about you. You're an oil and gas refugee, similar to Tim, but very different. He was from Houston. You're actually from Medellin, and you grew up in Medellin at a time that it was a pretty dangerous place to be. Let's talk about that to start with. How has that shaped you? Does that help you look at hard problems differently?
Yeah, I think so. I was born in Medellin. I was raised there. I was born in 1978. So you can imagine that the times of Pablo Escobar and all of the guerrillas, the very troubled country we used to have back then. I was 10, 11, 12 years old. So I grew up in that city. I remember, this seemed normal to me at the time, but I remember it's a valley, looking over the valley and seeing puffs of smoke and then hearing a boom, car bombs, as many as 5 to 10 a day at the peak of these things. So it's literally a war zone. Now you see it as normal. So I grew up seeing that as normal. I went to the army 5 years later. So I was in the army in the middle of that stuff. But somehow I got lucky, made it, and ended up in MIT a few years later. So that certainly shapes you, because you see how the world works at large and how some places in the world that are very beautiful, very capable, go through very, very serious problems. Now, I also learned in looking back that my carbon footprint was very nearly zero. I didn't know that at the time, but Colombia is largely a hydroelectric power country. So I grew up with almost a zero carbon emission footprint, which I feel very proud of, but probably I'm undoing now in oil and gas, or in my years in oil and gas. Anyway.
So you went from MIT then to oil and gas. So you're working for Schlumberger for some time, right?
Yeah, 15 years. So right after graduating college, went to work in oil and gas for 15 years. The reason was simply looking for technical challenges. I'm an engineer first. I remain very technical all my career, and I was seeking for challenges that were really powering the world. In this case, energy. So Schlumberger was a good place to be. I worked across many technologies: drilling, exploration, completion, cementing. So became very familiar with all of the technologies and services behind that industry. Lived in Houston, lived in Norway, very close to the geo markets on the North Sea. Lived in England, very close to research and technology development. And after 15 years, probably getting close to my 40th birthday, started very seriously questioning about my second part of my career and started thinking very broadly about energy. How much energy does the world use? Where does it come from? How is that changing over time? That eventually led me to an amicable departure from Schlumberger in 2017 and the beginning of what would become Quaise. My wife is here. She's here. She's been along this journey for 25 years. We married the day after we graduated, so she's seen it all.
Let's talk about energy, not this energy, the energy that the world
This is
needs.
a good energy.
Yeah. So you just mentioned something interesting. You started thinking about energy. You look back to how energy has changed since the Industrial Revolution. Talk us through some of the numbers there.
Yeah, so numbers matter. I think you have to use numbers and be quantitative when you think about energy to really understand the scale of the challenge. So um, we are a 25 terawatt civilization. You can use any units, but that's a good number to remember. 25 terawatts is what it takes to power the world today. Most of that is oil and gas. 80% of that is oil and gas. And that number hasn't changed for decades. Um, that number also doubles every 25 to 30 years. It's remarkable. If you go back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and you trend it, and we have the data, you see that there's a doubling every 25, 30, sometimes 35 years. So that's what fuels the world we have today. What we see in front of us, a city like this, the things, the devices we have, the way we came here, it's all a direct result of that energy abundance. If you look forward, I think it's going to continue to double every 25 to 30 years. Why wouldn't it? So this is not about AI just popping into the scene right now. This is not about the developing world coming into development. This is the background of civilization playing for hundreds of years. So we're not solving for today's 25. Energy transition is not really about today's 25. It's about tomorrow's 50 by 2050 or 100 by 2075. So we're looking for a 100 terawatt level solution. To put that into barrels of oil per day, which is the dominant unit today, we consume 100 million barrels of oil per day to fuel this civilization. Oil fields decline just to keep up with demand. In light of that decline, we'll see that the oil and gas industry puts into the world the equivalent of 2 terawatts of new capacity. So 10% of global capacity is being replenished on a yearly basis by the oil and gas industry just to keep up. Never mind demand increases. So that's the true scale of the problem. That's what we're looking after. Every energy source that we've ever unlocked, you looked at wood, you look at charcoal, you look at coal, you look at gas, you look at oil, they all increase. If you map this in the background, you see that at no point, except for very particular events like COVID or economic crisis, every single energy source continues to increase. So it's always adding up, but all collectively, it's always doubling every 25 to 30 years. So that was the mindset I brought into my search back in 2017 when I left Schlumberger, saying, how do we find the 100 terawatt solution? How do we enable a world that is not 100 million barrels of oil per day, but potentially 1 billion barrels of oil per day within 3, 4, 5 generations? And at that point, you realize that there's not a lot of ways to do that. There's only more oil and gas up to a point because there's a serious environmental impact, or geothermal, but not just any kind. And we'll get into temperatures in a minute. Fission and fusion. That's it. 3. It's a solution set of 3. That's the search space. Nothing else gets there. Not wind, not solar, not batteries, not transmission with, you name it, hydroelectric, nothing. It's 100 terawatt civilization and beyond. there's a solution space of 3. We're going to talk about one today.
Right. So your quest to solve this led you back to MIT, and then you found a piece of stranded IP there. Talk us through that.
Yeah, so I decided, we were living in England as a family. We have 3 kids. They're now grown up. We decided to come back to the States. We were living in the other Cambridge, and MIT was announcing at that time, this was late 2016, they were talking about the need to create a new kind of venture capital fund, one that would be more patient, one that would give the time and the capital to the very, very big ideas that we're having a hard time getting out of the university labs. Very promising solutions across energy, health, water, food security, communications, transportation, that were just not moving forward because there was no capital for that. So I became very intrigued by that idea. I decided to join that team for 1 year. So I became a venture capitalist of sorts for a year.
Those people.
Yeah, those people. They did enable this journey, though. So just to learn how venture capital works, I figured that was going to be necessary to really get a bold idea. And I hadn't identified Quaise, or what would become Quaise back then, just to get a bold idea out of a university lab and into a commercial journey. So that was 2017. At the same time, I was living in Boston. My wife was living in Puerto Rico. She's Puerto Rican with the kids. And that was the year Maria hit. And the whole island went dark for a year. So we lived that very close. No electricity. I mean, this is unthinkable. But we know what it looks like, So all of that combined to strengthen that search. How do we power the world? And how do we power the world reliably? So Quaise came to my attention. It wasn't called Quaise. It was a research program out of MIT. Had been working for 10 years out of the Plasma Science Fusion Center. And I saw it first as an investor. I was trying to get that team to articulate a real company, a real journey, make a team, make a business plan. And in that process, met Vinod Khosla. He was following that space very closely. But that was the beginning of that journey. So corporate, university venture capital, seeing the idea and eventually deciding to lead that forward.
And this is a key difference. So in Feather's case, Tim had been working in oil fields, fracking, had seen the technology that could get to a certain depth and was like, great, I can just reappropriate that for enhanced geothermal. Whereas you were like, nah, I don't want to use the existing one. I want to go with something new. Why did you go with something new? That's a road that is going to be rocky.
Yeah, I think we're solving different problems. So Tim did the right thing, and I met Tim very early on. He's solving the right problem for getting geothermal out of the hydrothermal constraint. EGS is a very, very good idea. We do EGS as well. The only difference is that we do it hotter. So why? We're solving a different problem. The problem we're trying to solve is that 100 terawatt civilization problem. So that form of geothermal doesn't do that. It cannot possibly do that because there's just not enough power output to do such a thing. For that, you need to go hotter. So that's the key first departure from every other form of geothermal. We believe, and we now know, that 400 degrees Celsius, quick shortcut, double that and you get Fahrenheit, so 800 Fahrenheit, give or take, is the right temperature. Why? Because we use water to move that heat from deep down below to the surface. And that is the ideal temperature for water to transport heat. So 400 degrees Celsius is the target. And that is a target that not only optimizes for geothermal's heat transfer from the subsurface, but it actually makes geothermal more powerful than fission, more powerful than fossil itself. That is a remarkable thing. When you start realizing that combination, and we'll talk about business models and why that's important, that is transformative. So we go for EGS systems at 400 degrees Celsius every single time. We don't compromise on that.
This was the point that you said, and I need to bring this out so I quote you correctly. You said to me, when a geothermal project fits the profit and scale of oil and gas, that's when something very special happens. And this is what you're referring to here. Can you just unpack what you mean by that?
Yeah, so this goes back to the fact that this is a fossil-powered world. We live in a world that is the direct result of fossil energy. Whether we like it or not, that is a fact. So that industry, the scale, the regulation, the human capital, the infrastructure, already operates at the right scale. The gap we're trying to close is the profitability. This is also a world whose operating system is capitalism at large. So to me, I want the oil industry to want to do geothermal when it grows up. And I mean that fully. I want the oil and gas industry to want to do geothermal when it grows up. I don't mean that in a demeaning way.
No. Yeah, tell us what you mean.
Geothermal is a bigger resource by all metrics than oil and gas. It dwarfs. You take all fossil energy, you take all nuclear energy, you take all wind, all solar, all hydroelectric, all energy combined, and geothermal just dwarfs all of that combined. People tell me, what about solar? Well, if you cover the entire planet on solar cells and you capture every photon falling from the sun, it would take you 3 million years to get to the level of energy that geothermal has already stored. Now, these are gigantic numbers. You don't even need a fraction of that to actually power civilization. So when I say that I want the oil and gas industry to want to do geothermal for a living when it grows up, what I'm alluding to is I want a geothermal project to match or exceed the unit economics, the profit margins, the geographical scalability, the speed of oil and gas projects. Because when you do that, the oil and gas industry does exactly that. And we just talked about the scale, the 2 terawatts. We just talked about all that's in the background, which dwarfs every other form of energy to deploy these at very large scale. So that's what we're trying to do. Our goal is not to do this ourselves as a company. Our goal is to instigate an inevitable pathway in that direction.
One of the fascinating things about your strategy is to be able to use existing assets that oil and gas has. So if you've got a gas-fired power plant, it's already got all of the infrastructure, including the interconnects, which is an important part of getting electrification to the people. You can just go there and you can dig a hole and you can match the unit economics that you'd get from gas. Actually, better than the unit economics you'd get from gas. Talk us through like what some of your strategies are around that.
Yeah. So the heat source. I mean, a lot of the electricity, most of the electricity in the world today comes from a thermal cycle. It means water is involved. You boil water, you make steam, you move a turbine, that moves a generator. The generator creates electricity. You push that electricity through. That's still true today. There's a lot of advances in other forms of energy, electricity in particular, that are taking a share away from that. But today, it's still mostly that. And we still hear of other countries building dozens to hundreds of power plants. They're in the pipeline. So they're going to be built and they're going to be locked in. They use heat as a source. Normally, that heat is you boil water. You burn a fossil fuel to boil water. So in many of those use cases, not all, but the vast majority of them, you could replace the heat source by geothermal. This type of geothermal, not the lower temperature geothermal. Lower temperature geothermal uses special niche organic ranking cycle supply chains. We're talking about the big supply chains of the world for power. So when you get to the 300, 400, 500 degrees Celsius, you squarely get in there, and that gives you the opportunity to look at that use case. We will do that. We call that a brownfield conversion because it repurposes many of the things. But we will also do green fields, which means you put power closer to load. I think that's even more attractive. Rather than trying to repower a power plant, which is doable, you actually put energy generation closer to load, and you actually do away with the need for transmission, storage, and all of those fixed cost complications that come about from the other energy sources. So there's a fundamentally different way to play this game, and moving energy closer to point of use radically changes the unit economics and the externalities of that energy.
The deepest hole that man has ever drilled, how deep is it?
12,000 meters, so it's about 8 miles.
And that took 20
years. Yeah.
Why did they stop?
I think they got told the Soviet Union was no more.
I heard it was because the drill bits were melting, but yeah, okay.
Well, a little bit of that too, but they kept going. They were at it. So yeah, it took 20 years. This was a Cold War playbook, right? We can do more things than you can. They're not the only ones. Germany in the 90s did a four-year to 9,000 meters, so a little bit shallower.
Okay.
China last year announced an 11,000 meters, so close to the Russian ones, and they did that in 2 years. That's pretty fast.
Okay.
The first 10 kilometers took 1 year. The other 1 kilometer took another year. So that shows the exponential. So it's been done.
Yep.
But I need to remark one thing. They're useless for geothermal because they're cold.
Right.
They were purposely done in places of the earth where it's very, very low geothermal gradient. So even though you go 10,000 meters, you're still not at the right temperatures, not even close to the 400 degrees Celsius. Those are all 180, 190, 200 degrees Celsius. So from a geothermal perspective, they're inconsequential and relevant. You need to do them deep and hot. Yep. Drilling technologies don't have a depth cap; they have a temperature at depth cap.
Yep.
That's what we're closing with our technology, and we haven't talked about the technology yet.
Let's talk about the technology, but let's start with the speed, though. You recently did a test through Granite where you were going, 5 meters, which is about 16 feet for people stuck on Imperial, in an hour versus the standard, which is 10 centimeters per hour.
Yeah, and this needs qualification, right? Because people will say, well, we can drill 100 meters an hour, which is 20 times faster than 5 meters per hour. That's true, but that's not true at depth and temperature. That's true close to the surface. That's true at low rock temperatures. And that's true for short sprints. So we're talking about economics of getting to a rock resource at depth. The typical numbers that you hear quoted on an instantaneous basis are much, much faster than that. But the real overall, all things considered, downtime and uptime, they start to be a fraction of 5 meters per hour. So we're not going for sheer speed. We're going for consistency. It's a tortoise and the hare kind of thing. 5 meters per hour is remarkable, especially because we see these doesn't change as we go deeper. In fact, actually improves as we go deeper. The physics work in favor of the process as we go deeper and hotter.
So how are you doing it? Tell us all about the technology.
Okay, so we don't replace drilling technology. So I worked in drilling systems for a long time. I know how they work. I know their limitations. We're not replacing drilling. Drilling is very mature technology. There's a very large supply chain. There's thousands of drilling rigs all over the world. We're extending the capabilities of drilling rigs. So we will deploy conventional drilling, meaning whatever the oil and gas industry uses, grinding and crushing of rock, all the way to the economic limit. It means when it starts to get a little too expensive, normally $2,000, $3,000 per meter. A meter is about that, 3 feet. Then that's when you start switching. And what are you solving for? Why is it getting expensive? For 3 main reasons. Reason number 1, wear and tear. Your drill bit wears too quickly. You have to replace it. To replace a drill bit that's 5,000 meters down, you're going to spend a week pulling the drill bit out of the hole. Meanwhile, you're paying $100,000 a day for the rig. So your economics really go downhill exponentially because you're not drilling a lot of the time. Because you're replacing drill bits. So that's problem number 1. We solve that problem because we have no drill bits. In fact, we don't have any sensors, any electronics, any cables, nothing. It's just a metallic pipe in the hole. We have a metallic pipe going 5,000, 10,000 meters down, and that pipe carries 2 things: a microwave beam at megawatt levels and a purge gas, nitrogen or air. Those 2 things go to the bottom of the hole, ablate the rock, so it literally vaporizes the rock. And some people in the audience, I see a few people here that have been to our tests, have seen that. It vaporizes the rock. It doesn't even touch the rock. There's nothing that wears or tears. There's no drill bits to replace. There's no electronics to replace. There's nothing that breaks other than the rock. So that's the first one. Second, to break rock, you have to put energy on the rock. Right? With a mechanical drill bit, you have to turn from the surface. So imagine a little spaghetti, a little pipe going all the way down there, and somehow you're turning here and it's turning there. You barely get 1 to 2% of the energy down there. You barely scrape the rock, and the deeper you go, the harder it gets. We beam energy at the speed of light. It gets there in nanoseconds, and it ablates the rock instantly. So that solves problem number 3. We get 10 times more energy to the rock to destroy the rock. And then problem number 3 is you need to remove the cuttings. To make a hole, you need to actually remove the material from the hole. So in mechanical drilling, you have big cuttings, usually millimeter-sized cuttings. Those cuttings need to be floated up with thick muds, and those thick muds create all sorts of problems over those distances, like pumping energy. They dissociate because it's so hot. They start separating. Some of the time they boil. So that gets really, really hard to do as you go deeper and hotter. We use air. It's much more stable from a temperature perspective across those distances. And we can use air because our cuttings are tiny. They're micrometric. They're ash. So shifting physics, they're very different processes. One is not better than the other. They're just suited for different conditions. And that's what allows us to pick up the job where drill bits start to fail.
So you don't see a world where you're replacing drill bits for traditional purposes for fracking. Your technology really is just focused on going to the ultra deep and ultra hot levels.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. What our goal is to go to the 400 degrees Celsius. And in some places, we only need to use our drilling technology for an extra 1,000 meters. In other places, we may need to use our technology for an extra 10,000 meters. Regardless, it extends the capability to reach the true resource potential, the true resource temperatures, which is what transforms the economics and the scalability.
How do you know where to dig?
So humans have been poking holes in the ground for a long time. There's millions and millions of holes. Many of these holes, we're talking about tens of millions. Many of these holes have actually been locked for temperature. So you actually look at the data and you say, well, it's actually hotter in the Western United States than the Eastern United States. Not surprisingly, it tends to coincide with tectonic boundaries and activities. So we have a fairly good idea when we look at the map of what the geothermal gradients are. And we don't need to know them precisely. It doesn't really matter. We need to know them roughly, because we're really talking about, are we going to hit the 400 degrees Celsius at roughly 4,000 or 5,000 meters? Or are we going to hit it at 8, 9, 10,000 meters? Or are we going to hit it at 18, 19, 20,000 meters, right? Because those are different projects and you need different capabilities to do that. But that's it. That's the nature of the challenge here. Now, a consequence of that is that there's no resource uncertainty whatsoever. This whole concept of, will you hit the hydrothermal resource that exists in geothermal, or will you hit the oil pocket that exists in oil and gas, or will you hit the copper vein that exists in mining? None of that exists because there's always heat, always, always. It's just, how deep is it? Is it here or here or here? And you actually start seeing it trending in the right direction to know. So it's actually a resource play without a lot of the exploratory resource play challenges that playbook brings. Yeah.
So describe us where you're at right now, and when are we going to see the first commercial plant from Quaise?
So sooner than you think. People, one thing I always find myself correcting.
What do you mean? What do we think?
By the end of the year.
Okay.
What did you guess?
I wouldn't have known.
So sooner than you think.
Yeah.
One of the things I find myself always correcting is 20,000 meters is the right depth to cover the entire world.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we need to go 20,000 meters on every project.
Yeah.
We're seeking the 400 Celsius rock. And if we look wisely, we'll find that as shallow as 2 miles, only 2 miles deep, or as deep as 12 miles deep. So where do you start the project? Well, you start the first project in the shallow one, because the first unlock is, let's go hotter to unlock the better unit economics, to show the parity with oil and gas, and get the engine of capitalism going to pick this up at scale, and then progressively move deeper, enabled by the technology to go deeper. So the first project is in Oregon. We're public about that. We'll be announcing a variety of milestones over the next several months. And the thing to look out for that project is the flow test. So in geothermal, a flow test is confirmation of resource. It's basically saying we can access the right temperature and we can move the heat up at the right quantities, and it's durable and it's predictable, because that allows you to say, and now I can build a power plant to make that heat into electricity or repower the power plant. So that event for us is the end of this year. We're 9 months away from the world's first Superhot EGS system, one that punches at the weight class of oil and gas and nuclear. That is a singular event in energy. I think that changes a lot of the conversation about what's possible with geothermal.
Some of the breakthroughs, and particularly bold projects, like, for example, Fervo, but then also Form Energy, have had their first customer be hyperscalers. I'm wondering, due to the fact that you solve some of the interconnection queue issues, because you can kind of go where there already is an interconnect, you can plug into existing grid infrastructure. Does that change your customer base, or is it only the hyperscalers that are prepared to pay for the deepest hole?
So our LCOs are actually lower. The levelized cost of energy is actually lower. So we do not require a premium. We do not need a high willingness to pay. Now, we'll announce the first offtake agreements. There's two clients this year. We'll announce that this year. One of them is of the hyperscaler kind, but it's not for those reasons. It's because they want power now, and they want it fast, and they want to see a pathway to get a lot more of that at gigawatt scale. It's not because we can charge them $200 per megawatt hour, right? So that's one of them. But I do believe that the most interesting way to build geothermal is to do grid second, not grid first. That very attribute of being able to take the power to where it's used allows you to start building and powering assets, infrastructure, industrial assets, data centers included, but also industry, and then add the grid as a second measure to serve other populations that require that. Like you go to the utility next. I think that's a more elegant way to solve for energy at the scales we're talking about. So the first project exhibits those characteristics. One of the customer is a hyperscaler, large industrial. The other one isn't. It's power for the people in the local community. And I think that combination is a very good combination. I think that scales very well.
Awesome. I'd love to switch topics a little bit and talk about the geopolitical implications of what you're doing. That was a subject that's come up before with geothermal, how, China, an area that I lived in for many years, has been seen to be way ahead of the West when it comes to new energy technologies. There's one exception, which is in the US, we know how to drill holes. And there's a competitive advantage here. Certainly that's Fervo's line. How does that change for you? Is that accelerated by what Quaise is doing?
Yeah, it creates a bigger margin. So I think that's true. The oil and gas industry, which is the industry that powers the world today, we want to change that, of course, for environmental reasons. But that industry is hands down way ahead in America than it is in China. That is a fact. China is the largest oil and gas importer in the world by a very wide margin. The US is a net energy exporter. So that right there, you see the fundamental difference. We are way ahead of China in oil and gas deployment. So geothermal follows that line. Now, the geothermal at low temperature, I don't think that actually scales like oil and gas because of the unit economics. So the geothermal we're proposing actually matches or exceeds oil and gas. So it will continue to preserve that margin with respect to China. And it will allow us to do this for others. This is not just for the United States, but the technology applies to others. Another thing about China, they are scaling clean tech very fast. They're scaling the things that you manufacture very fast, widgets and gadgets, solar panels, windmills, motors, batteries, nuclear reactors. I think as outside of fusion and fission, everything else they're doing is not going to create a lead. I mean, they're leading, but they're leading in the wrong things, right? Because those things don't power the world at 100 terawatt levels. So let them win that race, because that race leads nowhere. That's a very provocative statement, and I mean it in good faith. I do believe that it doesn't matter how fast you're going if you're going in the wrong direction. So we really need to focus on fission, fusion, and deep geo and win at that. I think deep geo is highly, highly actionable today.
You touched on scaling there, and I want to just dig a little bit. I can't stop using those analogies, but dig a little bit deeper on this.
It pervades the language. Let's go hard. Let's go deeper.
Yeah, that was not deliberate. So, when you think about scalability of the technology, one way to do that, one would argue the quickest way to do that would be to allow others to take your technology. Rather than you owning all the power plants and then having to get all the infrastructure financing to do everything around that. You've got a slightly different take on that with an interesting analogy to the mining industry. I'd love you just to explain that to the audience about how you view this scalability challenge and opportunity for the particular technology you have.
Yeah, so to me is fundamentally important for the oil and gas industry to do this. I don't think we move very fast if we say that Quaise goes in and does every project fully vertically integrated from beginning to end. That's very slow. There is a mighty industry ready to work 1,000 times faster for you. So our business model, it closely mirrors the business model of the mining junior or the oil and gas junior company. So let me unpack that a little bit. In a resource playbook in mining or oil and gas, these are resources. They have uncertainty. There's a lot of risk up front. There's a lot of capital intensity up front. The junior takes that risk. They go in, acquire the land, do the prospecting, poke a few holes, maybe 2, 3, de-risk the resource. They find and confirm the resource with 1 or 2 wells. They roughly spend $50 million. $50 to $100 million. And that's it. Because once you do that, then there's many, many more actors willing to play at their scale. Those, the majors now, who are not willing to take those risks, perhaps, are now able to go in because it's been the risk to the point that they like it. So we want to do that. An Oregon project is exactly that. We spend $50 to $100 million from balance sheet. This is our risk. This is how we earn our keep. We de-risk the resource, and then we convert that into a large-scale infrastructure project. Let's give numbers. A gigawatt development, that's a $5 billion development roughly. That's $5 per watt. Big numbers, but energy is big numbers. Of the $5 billion, we put 50, the first 50. That's it. We roll that into the equity stack. We complement that with the equity stack that others will pile in at the debt that will come after that, and that will just roll at massive speed. We're not the developer. We're not the operator. There's plenty of people for that. We're just the instigator. Now, the technology is required to scale the project. So the drill is required to actually access the resource. And for that, we have that business model of service provision. But that is not the main business model. The base business model is to instigate the playbook at very large scales and be the junior. Take that first risk and earn the very high margins that first money in commands. That has the best of both worlds. It gives you very, very high margins at very low capital exposures. And it enables the very large players of the world to move much faster than 1,000 companies can possibly move. It's a trade-off. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. You could do what other geothermal companies are doing, where because the margins are so thin, they have to do everything themselves and they have to vertically integrate. And that's fine. That's how you are responsible to your shareholders. But that doesn't move very fast because our projects have thick margins. We can spread that across the value chain and move way faster. This is not new. This is what oil and gas does today.
The types of challenges that you're talking about now must be very different to the challenges that you think about as a founder in the first 3 years of the business. I often talk about the kind of 0 to 100 founder as being somewhat non-existent. I tell most of our founders, actually I tell all of them, you're going to be replaced at Series B. Now there's some that make it through, but most of the time, there's just such a difference in the type of person or the type of skill set that you need to go from 0 to 1 to 1 to 100. It sounds like you're one of the 0 to 100s. I'd love you just to talk about how your role has changed over the past 8 years. Maybe split it into segments, whatever makes sense.
Yeah. And my wife's here. You can talk to her afterwards. She'll probably tell you a different story.
How difficult has he been?
So I think three phases, and I'll start by saying that I gave myself 10 years to do this. I don't.
2 years left. Okay.
2 years left. Yeah. I'm going to see the company succeed. I'm not here to abandon the company, but I have 2 more companies to build, and that's why I have a clock.
We're going to talk about that
We're
in a
going to talk
second.
about that in a
Yeah,
second.
yeah.
So the beginning phase, very technical. I remember I used to show up to board meetings with my 17-inch laptop, and the board was like, "What is that?" It's because I was doing calculations, I was doing engineering with the team, I was putting my hat on and convincing myself about many of the things we now take for granted as the technical targets. Um, so very technical, very very technical. I remember. Uh, in the very early days of ARPA-E, we were going to get an award in 2019, and they were second guessing themselves, saying, maybe we shouldn't fund this. I learned this afterwards, and I had to fly to Washington, D.C. and meet with the technical teams and say, guys, let's work through, let's whiteboard this thing, and I'll convince you why we need to do this. And it resulted in a positive outcome. So very technical, because it's a very technical company. Once we secure the Series A and I'm able to bring a few colleagues from my older career, then I have the luxury to not be that anymore, and start focusing a lot on team building, thinking about executive team leadership, and thinking about capital formation. Who's my board? Who am I going to find capital from in the Series A and the B? How much money do I need? What are the milestones? How do I tranche that? What is the best way to inflect value as capital gets deployed? So very strategic thinking, very systems engineering thinking, starting to think about the critical supply chains way out there to start actioning that. I don't know how you characterize that. That's a strategist. That's not a technical founder anymore.
Right.
And
you still enjoy it?
What's up?
Do you still enjoy that part of the?
I enjoy that part. Yeah. But I'm glad it finished. Because I
imagine
also the technical one. And now it's about thinking about the exit, right? It's if we deliver on the promise of this energy source that we are going after, what is the most efficient way to bring that to bear on humanity the fastest? So I'm thinking public markets. It makes sense. But I'm also thinking business models. I'm working with the banks. I'm working with my CFO, former investment banker. What are the capital structures? What are the partnership structures? So it's almost like playing the capitalism game as a strategist to try to understand how those pathways look like and how do you actually pull on those pathways. And by the way, the world has a context around you, so the companies going public in the space help re-articulate and reformat that hypothesis. In many ways, they pave your way. You draft right behind to be able to do what you need to do faster. So a big change. Today, I find myself being an evangelist big time, like this talk we're having, talking about energy, how much energy we need. That's an evangelistic function. And I've enjoyed all of those. I think going forward is I put myself on the clock simply because I think there's interesting companies to build beyond Quays. And at some point, I don't think I'm needed anymore. I'm not an operator. I am a builder. And I belong in the early days. And I know that about myself. I don't belong in the later days. I don't want to be a public company CEO. I don't want to be an operator. I don't want to be somebody trying to optimize for margins. I want to be somebody who unlocks something massively accretive.
I have to ask what these other 2 companies are in that case. And this, I guess, is drawing us to the end of this chat, which is exactly on time. So what are the other 2 companies that you're looking to
So one's very personal, and then she'll bring more color at some point if you hang around. So my son, my oldest son, he's 24. He was born with a physical disability. He's been on a wheelchair since his birth. He goes around in an electric wheelchair. He went to college 1,000 miles away from home. He figured that out, came back home. He's a writer. And I climbed Kilimanjaro with my wife and my 2 girls. They're 19 and 17. And I asked myself, how do I climb Kilimanjaro with my son? What is the machine that allows him to do that? I think we have the technologies to do that. It's in the area of robotics, autonomy, power systems. I don't think we have the business models. I don't think we have the regulatory environment to do that. But hey, my son is my son and he wants to do this. So why don't I build something for that? How do you exit that? How do you find a commercial pathway? That'll come because it's genuinely useful. So that's one. The other one is, if you think Quace is a long shot, this one is something else.
How deep are you going to go?
I'm going to lose all my credibility here. So, okay, this guy's crazy. Yeah, I'm not getting into the details, but it's in the area of propulsion systems. So to me, it's about frontiers going down, unlocking the heat of the Earth. Is a resource going up is another one. I'm not talking about going to the moon or Mars. I'm thinking, how do we get to another star? I don't think anything that we have is anywhere close to being able to do that. Now, that's not a company. That is a TRL 1, 2, 3 program that you advance and that you push through a network of universities and very, very targeted demonstrations. So it's in the area of propulsion systems that allow us to do something that we're not able to do today as a species. I don't even call that a company. I start by calling that a hobby, but something that fundamentally on success or even a simple demonstration just changes our concept of what's possible.
But is that from a vision perspective, or do you have a specific technology that you're thinking about for that?
Specific technologies.
Okay.
Some of these have been vetted by universities at this point, right? So very early, TRL 1, 2, 3. I can't talk much about that, of course, because I have a duty to my shareholders and I don't spend a lot of time doing that.
Okay.
But it pulls at the strings of my soul.
Everyone needs a hobby. Yeah.
Everyone needs a hobby.
All right, Carlos, thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to leave the place open for a bit, so do feel free to grab Carlos or anyone else and continue the conversations. Thanks.
Thank you.
SOSV Deep Tech Live.